The 1989 Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka is without a doubt one of the most controversial races in the history of Formula One. Very much one of many flashpoints between the great Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost in their infamous rivalry in the 1980s and 1990s. But why is this one in particular arguably the most controversial of the lot? For me, without a doubt, the most controversial of the lot, and also the home of, in my opinion, one of the most legitimate conspiracy theories in not only Formula One, but motorsport as a whole. Well, I am going to explain all in this video for you guys here. A bit of a retrospective look at, like I said, one of the most dramatic title deciders in the history of Formula One. So, let's dive in, guys. Let's have a look at why this one is an absolute classic and very much an infamous one, particularly for fans of Ayrton Senna, such as myself. In my opinion, the GOAT in Formula One, but that's another discussion for another day. What happened here? Well, let's look back a little bit first. Just like in 1988, the championship was dominated by McLaren in 1989, who had already wrapped up the Constructors' title at the previous round in Spain. Senna won the title in 1988, but Prost's consistency in 1989 saw things be less close in this year of Formula One. Prost never finished outside of the points in 1989, of course this being the days when only the top 6 scored points. So that stat is even more impressive when you put that into context. In fact, he only finished off the podium in Mexico and Hungary. Meanwhile, non-scores for Senna in his home race in Brazil, Canada, and retirements in the United States, France, UK, Italy, and Portugal had cost him big time. In fact, that crash with Nigel Mansell at Portugal in 1989, when Mansell had already been black flagged, is one of the most controversial incidents with Senna. So with that in mind, Prost was looking very strong to claim his 3rd title in Formula One, with just 2 rounds of the season remaining, Japan and then Australia around the Adelaide Street Circuit. In the days where you only got 9 points for a victory, Prost led Senna by 16 points with just 18 points left on the table. In fact, if all of the points you scored counted towards your total, Prost would have already won the championship by this point. But of course, these were the days where you had to drop some rounds from your total. That might seem alien to people nowadays, but of course this was the days when Formula One cars were a lot less reliable, so you had to drop a few races from your overall total. It was a way of evening things out effectively. However, coming into Japan, the momentum was very much with Ayrton Senna as he won last time out in Jerez in Spain, and Prost only managed to finish in 3rd place behind Gerhard Berger's Ferrari. Tensions between Senna and Prost in the McLaren camp were at an all-time high at this point. James Hunt even remarked before this race it was not an exaggeration to say that Senna and Prost hated each other, and that was very much the case. This is one of the great rivalries in the history of Formula One for this reason, among many others. That also being that these two are arguably 2 of the best drivers in the history of the sport. I'd say inarguably 2 of the best, really. But why were the tensions so high? Well, we don't have enough time to cover it all, but one of the big reasons is the fact that Prost at this point had already announced that he was going to leave to go to Ferrari for 1990, so there was very much no need to keep their relationship good heading into 1991 because they were going to be driving for different teams anyway. Add to that the deteriorating relationship between Prost and McLaren's engine supplier Honda, and a controversial incident at the San Marino Grand Prix earlier that year where Prost claims that Senna disavowed a gentleman's agreement between the pair of them. Like I said, these two did not get on. And this relationship probably had a bit more needle to it because Prost actually is one of the reasons why Senna got hired by McLaren in the first place. After 1987, McLaren were looking for a replacement for Stefan Johansson, and the one they wanted to get was Nelson Piquet, who of course was champion for Williams in 1987. However, Prost actually advocated for Senna to join the team, saying to Ron Dennis and the other board members at McLaren that they should go for someone younger, someone who has more potential for the future. And of course, Senna also brought Honda back in with him, just like Piquet did, so that would achieve their aim of getting Honda power units in the back of that car. The power units at that time, which were the undisputed king in Formula One. But in fairness, to play devil's advocate, Prost didn't want to probably be teammates with Nelson Piquet, as Piquet had a habit of very much rubbing his teammates up the wrong way. Just ask Nigel Mansell from their days at Williams. But now let's talk about the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix itself. In qualifying, Senna predictably dominated, qualifying for pole position by a scarcely believable 1.7 seconds. Nowadays, 1.7 seconds would cover the entire field in Q1, but back then it was the gap between Senna and Prost, who qualified alongside him on the front row in P2. Senna claimed 12 out of 15 pole positions in those rounds so far in 1989. He was an absolute qualifying master. His pole position record, while it's not the highest in Formula 1 anymore, is absolutely incredible if you take it as an overall percentage rather than an outright number. But Prost had a plan. He wasn't really banking on getting pole position in this one. He knew that Senna was probably going to out-qualify him, but just like in 1988, he hoped that he could get a good start and get ahead of the Brazilian heading into turn 1. And in fact, he very much banked on that with the setup of his car. He actually removed the gurney flap at the back of his car to try and improve his straight line speed overall, banking on getting ahead and getting the fresh air, and therefore being tougher to overtake. And that plan came to fruition. The professor correctly predicted what was going to happen at the start. Prost got off the line like a scalded cat, whilst Ayrton Senna actually bogged down a little bit and almost lost second place to Gerhard Berger going into turn 1. But he managed to fend off Berger, and then it was an incredible duel between these two in the land of the rising sun. Prost had the advantage in the early stages. Senna was around 6 seconds behind Alain Prost coming into the first tyre stops, and a slow stop for Senna did mean that he lost a couple seconds in the pits compared to his teammate. However, on those new tyres in the second half of the race, Senna very much got a second win and was catching Prost at a rate of knots. But like the great Murray Walker said many times throughout Formula 1, and it's absolutely true, catching is one thing, passing is another, and passing Prost was very difficult. Like I said, he took some downforce off his car, he went for straight line speed, he was very difficult to overtake, and Senna was finding this out. He was in theory quicker through the corners, but he couldn't make use of that because of the dirty air behind Alain Prost, and then on the straights, even with the slipstream, Prost was at least a match for Senna. It looked as though Prost was very much looking like the heavy favourite at this point to claim his third title. Even if Senna managed to get by Prost, Prost would still be world champion, because at this time you only got 9 points for the victory, like I said, and only 6 points for second place. Prost's advantage therefore would have been 13 points heading into the final round, and that was enough for him to get the championship. But that is very much not what happened. On lap 46 of 53, Senna took his opportunity. He got closer to Prost than he was ever at any point during the race, and he dived down the inside, heading towards the Casio Triangle chicane. Now, this chicane these days is often referred to as the Senna-Prost chicane, and this is why. Senna dived down the inside of Alain Prost, but Prost turned in and the two made contact. Prost jumped out of his car. He was out of the race, but Senna stayed in his car. He was urging the marshals to give him a push to get him restarted. Although his engine was cut out, don't worry, we will talk about the crash itself, but let's just focus on the remainder of the race and what happened after it before dissecting the incident itself. So Senna restarted his engine, but the problem for him was that his front wing, was half hanging off of his car, but despite that, he was absolutely rapid getting back into the pits. He had to drive an entire lap without his front wing on properly, and in fact it fell off through the Degner curves. You can actually go and watch this onboard of him trying to get back into the pits on YouTube, and I highly implore you do so. It's actually on the Senna Ultimate Onboard Compilations video. I'd never seen the full lap uncut before, but it's absolutely incredible viewing. He is incredibly quick through that whole track without a front wing. It's unbelievable how he managed to do that. But that was just the talent of Senna. Like Martin Brundle said on many occasions, he had a sixth sense of actually knowing how much grip was going to be in the corner before he got there. And that also evidently applied to when his front wing was hanging off too. Now, of course, he had to do a full lap because in these days, the entrance to the pit lane was actually before the final chicane rather than after it like it is today at Suzuka. When he got into the pits, his team repaired the car and he came out in second place behind Alessandro Nannini's Benetton. Benetton. However, Senna was absolutely flying at this point. Again, just like before, he had nothing to lose and he was catching Nannini at a rate of knots, going for an overtaking manoeuvre on 51 of 53 laps and passing Nannini going into the chicane. The difference being, of course, that Nannini was not a title rival, and second place for him and the Benetton team was very much a result they would have liked. Second place effectively, evidently, meant nothing to Alain Prost, even though it would have been enough for him to win the World Championship. So Senna converted the victory. He crossed the line in first place. He saw the checkered flag. He was celebrating. He was hitting his helmet. He had won the race. But something was going on. Something wasn't quite adding up. It didn't feel right. The drivers were not coming out to celebrate on the podium very quickly. They were still in the debrief room. What was going on? The TV crews were waiting. The Japanese public was waiting in the stands. What was going on? This was not normal procedure. And in the end, Senna was disqualified. Now, why was this? Well, interestingly, if you look at the footage of this race, I think there could well be a legitimate reason to disqualify Ayrton Senna. Like I said before, he urged the marshals to give him a push to help him get started, and indeed they did push his car to help him get started. Now, it's been a rule since the beginning of time in Formula 1 that if you receive outside assistance by the marshals to get going again, you cannot continue. We've seen that all the way back to the 1950s, and in fact at the Brazilian Grand Prix in 2024, Nico Hülkenberg was disqualified for this very reason. But this wasn't why he was disqualified. The official reason for Senna being disqualified from this race was that in the eyes of the stewards, in the eyes of the FIA, that he had rejoined the track illegally. Because he used the escape rope to rejoin the track, he was actually thrown out of the race. A laughable reason if I have ever seen one. Sometimes you can sort of see what stewards are thinking in terms of controversial decisions. You might not agree with it, but you can understand where their point of view has come from. With this though, this was absolutely ridiculous. There is a reason why escape roads are there. They are to allow drivers who are going to run off the track to rejoin it safely, especially in the event of an accident, just like what happened with Senna and Prost. And the president of the FIA, Jean-Marie Belest, later would say that you have to respect the distance of the race. The Grand Prix is sacred, and Senna did not complete a Grand Prix distance. If you want to be incredibly technical though, the Japanese Grand Prix was in total 310 kilometers long. The minimum distance for a Grand Prix is 305 kilometers, so even with cutting out the chicane, he very much did complete a Grand Prix distance quite comfortably, but that's not really the point here. Why was he disqualified? They've given that reason, but what is the real reason behind this? Well, right after the crash, Prost ran to the stewards to protest Senna rejoining the circuit, seemingly furious that the Brazilian had resumed the race, which obviously, when Prost crashed with him, and let's just talk about it very briefly, Alain Prost was absolutely not making that corner. There is no debate about it. You look at the onboards, you look at the footage that we can see, and Prost turned into Senna on purpose. He knew what he was doing. He deliberately crashed into him. The angle at which Prost is turning into the chicane meant that he never would have made it. He would have cut across the grass. He did that deliberately. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that, in the words of the stewards, what they would say nowadays, Prost very much caused an avoidable incident. That crash was 100% his fault. Senna very much had every right to go and overtake him. He may well have not overtaken him. We don't know, because Senna never made it to the corner. He may well have gone too quickly and had to run down the escape road as a result, but we'll never know because Prost stopped him getting there in the first place. So there is absolutely no question in my mind that Prost did that deliberately. He knew that Senna would not win the World Championship and that he would be champion, Prost would be champion, if Senna failed to finish the race. That was a fact. But anyway, let's talk about what happened in the stewards' room. What happened? Well, we'll never be privy to what actually went on in there. There's no footage of it. There is no transcripts of it. What happens in the stewards' room in Formula 1 stays in the stewards' room. We can only go on the accounts of the people who were in there. We have no direct feed in terms of what was actually going on in there. But Belest and Prost, there were very much heavy accusations for a long, long time, ever since at least 1984 at the Monaco Grand Prix, that these two two very much had a good relationship, and Belest did a lot of things to help Alain Prost. If you want to go find out more about the 1984 Monaco Grand Prix, I've already covered that in depth here on the channel, but let's focus on Japan in 1989. So it's not out of the realms of possibility at all to say that Prost was advocating for Senna to be thrown out of the race. In truth, like I said before, if they wanted to throw him out of the race, they could have just said that he received a push start from the marshals. After all, he did. That's literally what he did. He got pushed. But no, instead, they actually tried to make an example out of Senna. They said that he cheated. They said that he cut the chicane illegally and rejoined the track illegally, and therefore it was a disqualification. Additionally, on top of that as well, Ferrari may well have had a hand in this as well. Of course, this was an intra-team battle between the two McLaren drivers, but like I said in the intro, Prost, he was going to drive for Ferrari as their lead driver in 1990, and they very much had a vested interest in, of course, getting the number one car on the red car in 1990, and that's something they obviously did because, like I said, Senna disqualified, Prost champion for the third time in 1989. Now, on top of this as well, I heard an account from Joe Ramirez, one of the head guys at McLaren at that time, and he actually said that Alain Prost's car was undamaged, at least not seriously damaged anyway. If he wanted to continue the race, he could have done, and he would have won it as well, because presumably he wouldn't have had to come in for repair damage like Senna did, and he would have won the race comfortably and therefore the world championship. He didn't need to retire, he didn't have to retire, but he chose to jump out of the car anyway. In hindsight, a very bizarre decision, an illogical decision from a man that is infamous for making calculated decisions, but for once emotion got the best of Prost. This was rare this happened, but it did happen on this occasion. Now, we will never know whether Senna would have won the world title in 1989 had he won the Japanese Grand Prix like he should have done. There is no doubt in my mind that he should have won this race. That penalty should not have stood, and therefore would have had a chance of winning the world title in Australia. We don't know whether that would have happened in terms of Senna being able to get a title that year. It's very much up in the air. The Adelaide race a couple of weeks later was an absolute washout. Yes, the race did run, but Alain Prost, already having won the title at that point, chose to withdraw due to the heavy rain, so he basically didn't compete in the race, and Ayrton Senna actually crashed out of the race after 13 laps. Unlucky for him. So those incidents, in terms of both those guys getting out of the race, I doubt either would have happened had there still been a championship battle on the line at that point. Prost may well have won it anyway. He didn't have to do what he did at Japan, and that's why it makes it all the more frustrating. So for me, it's absolutely not a conspiracy theory. This is a conspiracy fact. This was very much a fix by the FIA, Belest and Alain Prost. There is no doubt in my mind whatsoever. Whether Senna would have won a title in 1989 had it not been from getting disqualified at Japan, we don't know. Prost probably would have won it anyway. All he had to do was finish second at the Australian Grand Prix. But given his actions, of course, in Japan, for me, if we're talking about things being right and proper, Prost very much should have got a penalty for what he did. And in fact, 8 years later in 1997, Michael Schumacher was disqualified from the championship for deliberately crashing into his championship rival for that year, Jacques Villeneuve. I'm not saying that Prost should have been disqualified from the championship, but given what happened later on, you can see where a similar penalty may be applied. I'm just saying, if we're going to give Senna a bogus penalty for something he didn't do, you really should be punishing Alain Prost if we're talking about being fair here. After all, he deliberately crashed into his title rival. It's black and white. But it got worse for Senna. Believe it or not, the FIA weren't happy with just disqualifying from this race. They wanted to make an example out of him. Senna appealed to FISA, the sport's top regulator, after the Japanese Grand Prix to try and get his penalty overturned. Unsurprisingly, the case was mysteriously dismissed by Belest. Who would have imagined that? And then he actually gave him a $100,000 fine, equivalent to about $250,000 these days, and a 6-month suspended sentence. On top of that, Belest as well demanded that Senna publicly apologize for driving dangerously during the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix. And if he didn't apologize for this, he would ban him from competing during the 1990 season. No, I am not joking. That's actually what he had to do. Senna then put out a statement under pressure from McLaren, under pressure from their engine supplier Honda, as well as a lot of their major sponsors. After being publicly humiliated at this point, Senna understandably wanted to quit Formula One, but he was persuaded by team boss Ron Dennis to stay in the sport. Dennis reportedly said to Senna that if he left Formula One, they win. And that very much did fire Senna up to compete in Formula One in 1990. And in fact, one of Senna's greatest rivals, Nelson Piquet, said at the Japanese Grand Prix the following year that the penalty to Senna was absolute bogus. There was no reason for that. It would have been far more dangerous for Senna to turn around, drive back onto the track going the wrong way just to complete what Bortoleto called the race distance at that time. When Nelson Piquet is defending you like that, and after everything that Piquet has said about the likes of Senna and Mansell, you know you're very much in the wrong. That's what Bortoleto would have known at that point. At least I hope so anyway. Even though he, of course, famously said, "The correct decision is my decision." Very much doesn't sound like a dictator there at all. After Bortoleto left the governing body in 1991, Senna promptly rescinded his statement apologising for his conduct during the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix. So you already know about Senna and Prost, legends of the sport. Senna would win the title in 1990 and again in 1991. Prost would leave the sport after 1991 but come back to win a fourth world title, this time with Williams in 1993. Senna, of course, would tragically pass away during the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix, something that I will probably have to cover at some point for you guys, but I'm just getting emotional even thinking about that race. Very much a tragic one in so many ways. But let's talk about Alessandro Nannini, because he won this race. It's easy to forget about that fact, but he did win the race. He shouldn't have done, but he had an excellent Grand Prix nonetheless, and this was officially his only ever win in Formula One. He would compete in 1990 again for Benetton, and he claimed 3 more podiums during that season. However, after the Spanish Grand Prix in 1990, unfortunately, he was involved in a horrific helicopter accident that severed his right forearm off. Nannini was involved in a helicopter crash at his Siena vineyard over in Italy when the ground beneath the landing pad actually gave way. In the ensuing accident, Nannini suffered a severed right forearm. The injury healed thanks to microsurgery, but it effectively ended his Formula One career, although incredibly he did manage to return to racing in 1993, and he managed to have an incredibly successful career in touring cars. Nannini was very much a rising star at this point. He courted the interest of Ferrari and also McLaren, although he was re-signed for Benetton in 1991. I very much would have been interested to see how he would have got on alongside Nelson Piquet and also a certain Michael Schumacher, if indeed he did move to Benetton in 1991 in this alternative timeline, but we'll never know. This was also not the final controversial clash between Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost. Of course, the two would come to blows very famously at the 1990 Japanese Grand Prix as well, but that is a story for another day. And I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video, this recap of the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix. I really enjoyed making it. It's a very emotional one for me. You know, you guys know I'm a big fan of Ayrton Senna, and you know, just talking about this race does get my blood absolutely boiling, to be honest with you, because it's just daylight robbery. Out of all the conspiracy theories in Formula One, like I said, for me, this is without doubt one of the most that has credence to it, has clout to it. I genuinely believe this is a conspiracy. For me, it's a conspiracy fact, not a conspiracy theory. But get your thoughts in the comments below, guys. I want to hear what you have to say. Let me know what you want to see next. I might do one about a incredible Canadian Grand Prix in the build-up to Canada, which is the next round of the season. But if you guys really want to see another one, do let us know in the comments below. Like, share, comment, subscribe if you want to see more like this, guys. And have a fantastic week wherever you are in the world today. And we'll see you very soon.